This program is presented by the Fromm Institute for Lifelong Learning at the University of San Francisco. The Fromm Institute, keeping up with the times no matter when.
I am ready. I'm very ready. It's so interesting. I want to say it's lovely to see you all, but I see little thumbnails of who you are up there, and I recognize, of course, many, many names, but I know that there are people from, a variety of places around the country and the world actually being able to watch. So, welcome again to you all to week number 6 of our class. I cannot believe it. But I come to each week really, um, it's like I'm growing with you. I'm learning things about a composer I thought I knew a fair amount about, but as our 6 weeks have progressed and with 2 more to go, I know that, well, I'm learning a lot. And from some of your responses, I can I can feel your curiosity. But I just want to return to some of the questions and comments that came in last week. Please feel free to do this. Several people have talked to me about my remarks about women conductors. Someone asked if Joanne Falletta, who is the conductor in Buffalo, New York, would be considered, Buffalo's Symphony would be considered a major orchestra. And I looked some of that up, and orchestras are categorized into major and minor orchestras by their budgets, basically. And so of the big orchestras that have lots of money, Buffalo doesn't quite fit in. But things are changing. All we have to do is look at San Francisco Opera with its new woman director of artistic director, and the person in the pit really controlling things, and also to look at the Atlanta Symphony, which has just to replace Robert Spano, who is retiring. They have just appointed a wonderful new conductor who's got. I've watched some videos. She's amazing. Several people, no, some person asked me. I had been talking about Bernstein's pieces, those little piano miniatures. I played one of them a couple weeks ago for you because I ordered them, and every evening I sort of sit down and explore another one or two. Was asking if those little portraits called anniversaries are in any way similar to Elgar's Enigma variations. Probably not. The Enigma variations, each of the variations is, according to Edward Elgar, a portrait of a portrait of a particular person. In the case of anniversaries, they're not so much little portraits, but he precedes it. He'll say it's for so and so, for so and so. A couple of them also will say in memoriam. And he talks about trying to maybe just sort of speak to a mood of a person, but they're not really portraits. It's a great question. Several of you wrote about the premiere of the new movie Bernstein's Wall, which was given at the Mill Valley Film Festival. I've talked about it a couple of times in my notes to you. We'll be happy when finally that's released in a way we all can enjoy it, but I've heard very good reports, and that it kind of went behind the music making and talked about his life and his commitments. Let's see. Someone wrote, "What is a right interpretation of a score, and what is a not so right interpretation?" And it's a great question. And in a way, Bernstein has the answer to that. Despite all of his pyrotechnics on the podium, despite all of his self-involvement, he said frequently that the sound he wanted to get out of the orchestra or whomever was performing, he wanted it to be the composer's sound. And we're going to talk a lot about this next week, about he is a composer, but how he related to other composers and to their music, both young and old. So there really isn't a right or wrong interpretation of a score. I think you can, but there is always room. I don't know whether any of you went San Francisco Symphony last weekend. I did. Phenomenally interesting concert with works of Messiaen, Sariaho, the Finnish composer, and he bookended it with Debussy, Prelude at the beginning and La Mer at the end. And it was really interesting hearing comments from people in the audience, a little concerned about the interpretation of La Mer that Saladin gave. It was a very interesting, clean, sort of Northern European take on the piece. So there's certainly latitude for a conductor, but I think Bernstein has the answer. He wants the sound out of the orchestra that the composer wants. Someone wrote, "What's the difference between a prelude and an overture?" It depends on how you, the composer, use it in a context. Prelude gives a feeling, to me, of something sort of sacred. Bach wrote many preludes and fugues. A prelude, obviously, is something that precedes something. Overture, I think we tend to think more in terms of opera, of having an overture, sometimes a suite. For example, an orchestral suite will have an overture. But I think Bernstein was very careful to use the word prelude that we talked about last week as there's a somber, to me, there's a somber feeling about that word as opposed to overture. Someone wrote that they saw the original West Side Story on the Broadway stage and paid for good seats $2.50. Reminded me of the first night I saw Hamilton. I luckily was in New York in the first week that Hamilton transferred from off-Broadway to Broadway, and I got an orchestral seat in that first week, I think for $90. Things did change after that, didn't they? Someone said there's a wonderful interview on the show called Car Talk with Alexander Bernstein. I've got to look it up. I haven't done. Another interesting sort of response, as we spent a lot of time last week working on West Side Story, and this point is very well taken, that at the same time Leonard Bernstein was writing West Side Story, he was writing Candide. Two very different shows. There was a mixing across in his own work. I know that he would try something out in one musical venue, didn't fit, it might have worked in another musical venue. Composers are always certainly borrowing from themselves, and we're going to discover a piece that he did some borrowing from today. I look at, you're going to be surprised at my sort of analysis, but I look at West Side Story as an opera. I mean, it has all the traits of opera, even though they didn't want to, as they said, fall into the operatic trap. But it has this seriousness and its musical style, particularly if you think of the ending that we spent 3 minutes on last week, just listening to a composer who had the courage to end a musical that profoundly and that quietly. Candide, on the other hand, to me is much more of an operetta. It's much more musical comedy, even though it is obviously dealing with the Voltaire story. But it's so fascinating that he would have the ability to work on two scores at the same time, keep them separate in a variety of ways. Someone mentioned that and I've seen it, there's a wonderful documentary on Rita Moreno, who was in the original West Side Story. I believe it's on Netflix, but it's a wonderful sort of portrait of her as a Latina and how hard it has been for her how hard it was at the beginning to sort of break into regular roles. On that issue, it's interesting to note that in the movie of West Side Story, which was when the public began to wake up to what a profound, powerful work it is, in the movie, they used many, many Anglo actors and they put dark makeup on them, just so you know. Someone said, why did he choose Jose Carreras to be the tenor lead? Well, the same thing with Kiri Takanawa singing the soprano lead. Why did he choose opera stars to sing the roles of, at least in the story, of people who are in their teen years, and it didn't work. And for example, the recording from the San Francisco Symphony with MTT from about 5 or 6 years ago, I think is wonderful in that it captures youthful voices, but voices that are trained and voices that are able um, to nevertheless depict the kind of vocal sound that you would get out of a young singer. So those were sort of the comments and questions that came in last week. Please, please feel free to keep doing that. And you all got my letter this week. I really want to talk just a moment about our last class, which is 2 weeks from today. I know Zoom tends to pull us apart. We only see ourselves occasionally in little portraits that are running across the top of our screen. We don't, with a class this size, there's really, to me, it would be difficult to sit down and have a really wonderful discussion. We can't do that, but we still have community. And I'm getting it from the kinds of notes that I'm getting from you. So during this last class, I want to take a few minutes, not a long time, because we have an important subject to sort of cover that day, but I want to take a moment to kind of pull together some of your thoughts, some of your responses. I will do it anonymously, but I think it would be wonderful to be able to share these with one another. So I asked you 4 questions. What has aroused your curiosity through this course? Where have you been led into new play? What are you curious about in your study? The second question was, what has been most challenging? What piece of music has been the most sort of get up and figure this thing out? Or what part of his life has been challenging? But where have you been challenged to grow, to think beyond the comfortable? Did you have an aha moment? Several of you have already written to me that indeed you did. And then also, what would you have liked to have heard more of? What kind of music from Leonard Bernstein? And what would you have wanted less of? So I'm going to send you out a note later this week, and I'm going to put a deadline on it because I need a day or so to kind of pull things together. But the more of you who can participate, the richer will be my ability to share back with you some of your own comments. Okay, so that's questions, concerns from you, and also from me. So now we get started on this week's assignment. Hang on a second, I'm going to share my screen, and off we're going to go. Okay, we're almost there. You do one other button to push here, and then we're clear. So week 6, Leonard Bernstein, musical supernova. Our discussion today is Leonard Bernstein as a composer for film and for concert hall. Remembering that last week we spent a lot of time talking about his compositions for the stage. So today we're going to really look at 5 different works, a couple of them in real depth, and some of them sort of from up in the air looking down on them. We're going to discuss one song because I think it's important to sort of see how he deals with text. And I've got a way that I think will be helpful to all of us. We're going to see his comfort level in the jazz idiom. Then we're going to discuss one of his 3 symphonies. This is the symphony that I put in the homework assignment for this week. If you didn't get to it, maybe today's lecture will get your imagination going and will help you get back to it during the week. So Symphony number 2. Briefly, we're going to look at the only films, listen to and look at the only film score that he created on the waterfront. And finally, we're going to go in depth into a choral score and his setting of a number of psalms in Hebrew called Chichester Psalms. So that's sort of our program for the day. And we're going to start with a little bit of humor, with his ability to kind of get into the head and the minds of different kinds of people. This is a cycle of 5 songs, 5 kids songs that are for soprano and piano under the title of I Hate Music. A friend of Bernstein's, who was also a flatmate of his during the 1940s, was totally fed up because Bernstein was in the other room constantly coaching singers and playing the piano, and she finally just walked out to him one day and just said, "I hate music." This was written in 1943, and it was premiered by the soprano Jenny Turrell. It was her American debut in New York. And Virgil Thompson, the composer, wrote in the New York Herald Tribune afterwards about these songs. He said they are witty, they are alive, and they are adroitly fashioned. So I want you to just take a moment with me and speak it out loud. We're going to read through the text of 3 of those 5 songs that I want to play for you. The first one. My mother said that babies come in bottles, but last week she said they grew on special babies' bushes. I don't believe in the storks either. They're all in the zoo, busy with their own babies. And what's a baby bush anyway? My name is Barbara. Or the next one. Jupiter has 7 moons, or is it 9? Saturn has 1,000,000,000, billion, trillion, 69, and everyone is a little sun with 6 little moons of his own. I hate music, but I like to sing. But we have only 1. Just thinking of all the fun we'd have if there were 9. Then we could be just 9 more times romantic. Dogs would bathe till they were frantic. We'd have 9 tides in the Atlantic. The man in the mood would be gigantic. But we have only 1. Only 1. And finally, I hate music, but I like to sing. La 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 la. But that's not music. Not what I call music. No, sir. Music is a lot of men with a lot of tails making lots of noise like a lot of females. Music is a lot of folks in a big dark hall where they really don't want to be at all, with a lot of chairs and a lot of airs and a lot of furs and diamonds. Music is silly. So I'm going to play for you those 3 songs, and I'm going to show them to you as you hear them. I know a number of you read music, and I thought it would be interesting for those of you who wish to follow along. And one of the things I ask you to think, the 2 of the things I ask you to think about. First of all, as you hear these is the wonderful relationship and partnership between the piano and the voice. And the second thing is, as you follow the score, to notice in his setting of text how he's not afraid to change the accents, to change the meter, the timing. So you'll have a measure that's in 3, a measure that's in 5, a measure that's in 4, a measure that's in 7, all to serve the text. 5 kid songs.
Says that babies come in bottles, but last week she said they grew on special baby bushes. I don't believe in the storks either. They're all in the zoo, busy with their own babies. And what's a baby bush anyway? My name is Barbara. Jupiter has 7 moons, or is it 9? Saturn has 1,000,000,000, trillion, 69. And everyone is a little sun with 6 little moons of its own. But we have only 1. Just think of all the fun we'd have if there were 9. Then we could be just 9 times more romantic. Dogs folks would pay till they were frantic. We'd have 9 tides in the Atlantic. The man in the moon would be gigantic. But we have only I hate music, but I like to sing. La-dee-da-da-dee, la-dee-da-dee. But that's not music, not what I call music. No, sir. Music is a lot of men in a lot of tails making lots of noise like a lot of beavers. Music is a lot of folks in a big dark hall where they really don't want to be at all, with a lot of chairs and a lot of girls and a lot of furs and diamonds. Music is silly. I hate music, but I like to sing. La-dee-da-da-dee,
So I hope you captured his ability his incredible ability to set language, particularly English, to catch the humor, but it's not overblown. And Bernstein said, for example, children must receive musical instruction as naturally as food and with as much pleasure as they derive from a ball game. He got kids. Another thing he got was jazz music. Prelude, fugue, and riffs. This is a piece, a set of 3 movements for jazz band, and it was written for Benny Goodman between 1946 and 1948. Originally, he wrote it for Woody Herman, but then he dedicated it ultimately to Benny Goodman, and it was first performed by Al Galodaro in 1955. The score really, I think, reflects Bernstein's ability to embrace jazz and to make it his own. And I thought I've got to go back and just spend a moment listening to how he describes some of the qualities of jazz in one of his lectures. Here it is.
Now, what does improvising mean? It means that you keep a tune in mind with its harmony and all, and as they used to say, just go to town, or make it up as you go along. Now, going to town means that you add ornaments and figurations and furbelows of various sorts, or you can make up variations in the old-fashioned way, just as Mozart and Beethoven used to do. Let me show you a little of how Mozart did it, and then maybe you can see a little bit better how Art Tatum does it. Mozart took a nursery rhyme, which he knew as "À vous dirai-je, maman," which we know as "Mama, see the tiny ducks," or as a way of singing the alphabet. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P. You all know that tune. Now Mozart begins to make a series of variations, and one of them begins this way. Then another begins in a whole different way. Then there's one that goes. And then, as I recall, one begins very differently from all the others. You see, they're all different pieces, but they are all basically that same tune. Now, the jazz musician does exactly the same thing as Mozart did. There are infinite possible versions of Sweet Sue, for example. The clarinet might improvise a chorus of Sweet Sue this way. Now, he could have done that in any number of ways. If I asked him to do another chorus of it tomorrow morning, it would come out a whole different piece. But it's still Sweet Sue, and it's still jazz. Now we come to the most exciting part of the whole thing, for me at least, that's simultaneous improvisation. This happens when two musicians improvise on the same tune at the same time. Neither one knows what the other one is going to do. So they listen to each other and pick up phrases from each other and answer each other and kind of talk together. The one thing that holds them together is the chords or the harmony of Sweet Sue. And over this harmony, they each play separate melodic lines, which in musical terms creates an accidental counterpoint. This is the germ of what we know as the jam session. Now the trumpet will join with the clarinet in a double improvisation on Sweet Sue, and see if you can distinguish the two separate melodic lines. But point or no point, I found myself recently in the same position, writing a concert piece for jazz band. This is the piece we referred to earlier in the session. We're going to play it for you now. It is called Prelude, Fugue, and Riffs. It's in 3 short continuous sections, a prelude for the brass alone, then a short fugue for the 5 saxophones, and then riffs for everybody. In one way or another, it uses all the elements we have been discussing during this time. I hope you will feel in it some of the special beauty of jazz that I felt when I was writing the piece. And I hope that our investigation of jazz today will help you see a little more clearly why I think of this piece as a serious piece of American music.
So here's just a little taste. That's the Frankfurt, Germany Radio Symphony Orchestra. Now, keep in mind, as we go particularly through today's class, that we started out with those amazing little miniature songs for kids, or about, or from kids, maybe is a better way to say it. And that same composer can write a jazz piece like that and do it. He's clearly very comfortable in the idiom. He's able, one of the things that I have been so continually impressed by is his ability to range over this wide palette of musical styles. And he doesn't just brush the top of the surface of them. He really is able to dig in, as we heard with his taking Mozart and comparing Mozart to what a jazz musician would do with the song Sweet Sue. So from the songs for kids to the jazz ensemble work, prelude, fugue, and riffs, we now turn today for the bulk of our first bit of work today with Bernstein's Second Symphony. And it's called The Age of Anxiety, which is the title of a poem that was written by W.H. Auden, published first of all in 1947. And he got Auden got some of the worst reviews of his career. Many people said it was one dull book, his only failure. But for many people, it kind of struck a powerful chord, sort of giving a name, and we're in 1947, to the cultural condition in the industrialized world, of what the condition was of the society in the mid-20th century. And it's kind of a search for faith that is fomented by the energy, I think, of the Second World War. T.S. Eliot said, he said that this is probably the best work to date that W.H. Auden has written and worked. The Age of Anxiety won a Pulitzer Prize in 1948, and by a couple of years later it had been reprinted a number of times. Leonard Bernstein regarded it as, quote, one of the most shattering examples of pure virtuosity in the history of English poetry. And he called it a Baroque eclogue. So the poem itself highlights, if you can hang on to one theme, I would say that it is human isolation. And it's a condition that has been, for Bernstein and I think for Auden, that's kind of been magnified by the lack of a religious faith to kind of hold the society together. And it's a story that goes on for pages and pages, but briefly, very briefly, the story is, it's set in a bar in New York City where four strangers, three men and one woman, they meet there, they begin to talk, they drink an awful lot of alcohol, and she invites them back to her apartment, hoping that two of the men will leave and one of the guys will stay. The two leave and the one guy stays, but he is so drunk he passes out on a bed. So that after exploring sort of this spiritual emptiness and the loneliness and the anxiety and purposelessness of these characters' lives, the whole poem ends the next morning at dawn on the lonely streets of the city. So the poetic form is, as you can see here, there's a prologue, then there's a section called the Seven Ages. Now this is Auden. And then three more sort of parts of the poem, a dirge, a masque, and an epilogue. Well, as I mentioned, Bernstein was just fascinated by this. He said, I have read this and, quote, I find it fascinating and hair-raising. And he said the composition of a symphony based on the Age of Anxiety became almost a compulsion for me to finish it. Several people had suggested to him that he needed to look at this in terms of writing music about it. One of his friends wrote, why don't you try a tone poem on the theme of anxiety? The four themes, they're in relationship, pairing off of drama. It would be a phenomenal piece. You can do it. So he took it on. and he took it on with great amounts of energy. And it was Serge Koussevitzky who commissioned this piece called The Age of Anxiety, or Symphony Number 2. It was premiered in 1949 with the Boston Symphony, Koussevitzky conducting, and of course Bernstein was playing the solo piano part. And it was really to honor his mentor, Serge Koussevitzky, on the 25th anniversary of his being with the Boston Symphony. I think that as we explore the symphony, and I hope some of you've been able to do it this week, we encounter a theme that we have found in our 5 weeks to now in our discussions, theme that just keeps recurring. So here's how Lenny described the piece and the poem. He said, the essential line of the poem and of the music is the record of our difficult and problematical search for faith. So he identified really strongly with this poem of Auden, and he decided to write this as a kind of piano concerto. He says that the piano in this really is a kind of autobiographical protagonist, that the piano is the one individual who is out in life questing, looking for meaning and faith in his or her life. And one could also say that this was taking place in the early days of the Cold War. It was taking place in the time of McCarthyism. So it may have been kind of a mask for the concern of artists about the society that we were living in the middle of the 20th century. I want you to know, if you hear a little extraneous noise, of all the times outside my door are the people not just with their leaf blowers, but with their chainsaws doing something to bushes. So if you can't hear me, let Dawa know. So Bernstein finished the piece, and he looked back on the composition of it, and he said the following. He said, quote, "No one could be more astonished than I at the extent to which the programmaticism of this work has been carried. When each section was finished, I discovered upon looking at it again, detail after detail of programmatic relationship to the poem." So Bernstein takes Auden's poem and he sets it up in this following fashion. It's really in basically two long movements. The first movement has 3 sections to it. There's a prologue, and then there are sets of variations. It's one of the reasons I wanted to do the jazz piece earlier, because jazz is all based on a form of variations, not unlike what Mozart did. Bernstein's are a bit different, but it's an organizing principle for him. And then part 2 has 3 parts in it, and it is first of all the dirge, then the mask, and then the the epilogue. So we'll turn first of all. Let me get a sip of water here. I'm having a good time here amidst the chainsaws. Anyway, we move first of all to this opening of the piece, and it's a prologue. Not a prelude, not an overture, but a prologue. It implies it's setting the stage for a story to begin. And it begins with what he called an echo tone duet for 2 clarinets in a kind of improvised style. And the same thing happens with the poem. One of the characters is sitting behind the bar, and behind the bar, sitting at the bar, and behind the bar is a mirror. And one of the characters keeps staring into the mirror, wondering if life is better for the mirror version of himself than it is for him. Or perhaps so the duet maybe symbolizes the reflection and the reality of one of these characters. And it's also, here are the 6 or 7 words that Leonard used to describe this prologue. He said, "It is the loneliest music that I know." I'm not going to play any video, and it starts very softly. But let's spend 2 minutes just listening to this duet, the loneliest music Bernstein knew, and the person trying to figure out with the character in the mirror who that character is and what is its relationship to me. That is lonely music, but totally sets the scene. When I listen to it, I'm always reminded of this painting of Edward Hopper, painted in 1942 of that night. I think it's called Nighthawks, and I just that's the scene that this prologue sets, and then we enter into a set of variations. You heard that sort of scale descending down into, Bernstein would say, down into the unconscious of the people who are in that bar. They're going someplace they've never been before. And now we get to the 7 life sort of variations. And so the entrance of the soloist, you heard the beginning of the piano coming in after that beautiful prologue. Now we get a set of variations. Now, this is not variations in the Sweet Sue fashion or in the Mozartian fashion. Bernstein says he's not taking a melodic line and trying to build upon it, but he says that each of the variations differ from one another in that they don't have a common theme, but what they try to do, and this is just fascinating, is he tries to, you have variation 1, variation 2 then tries to go back and capture one particular feature of the first variation and then build upon that. And he goes back to the Auden poem, and each of the variations stands for a particular part of our lives. And the first variation is with the first age, or infancy through early childhood. Behold the infant, helpless in a cradle, and righteous still, yet already there is dread in his dreams at the deed of which he knows nothing, but knows he can do. It's very, very simple, almost like a hymn or a chorale solo for the piano. And then it's going to end with that scale that keeps descending down into the realm of unconsciousness. We have descended into this realm of the unconscious, and we're ready for variation too. This takes that descending piano figure and begins to develop it as it's descending into the unconscious space in our lives. And it begins very quietly, but it soon sort of becomes very, very agitated. And this variation is really about adolescence. Threatened from all sides, embarrassed by his body's bald statements, his sacred soul obscenely tickled and bellowed at by a blatant without, a dog by daylight, in dreams a lamb, whom the nightmare ejects nude into a ball of princes, too big to feel, disturbed by his distress. He starts off now poor, unprepared on his pilgrimage to find his friends, the far off elite adolescents. To me, it programmatically absolutely works. It's a long time ago, but remembering my own or watching other people's adolescence, you're flung from pillar to post through a variety of emotions. And I think Bernstein captures that adolescent quality as he gets ready now to move to variation 3. You notice that there is no sort of female partner that gets talked about. And in a way, one could say, well, maybe the female partner is the piano because there are times when she is left out. This variation has no piano in it whatsoever. The pianist is silent. And instead, it's a lush, there's a melody that rises over a kind of plodding, walking line. And this is one of his recycled pieces. He had tried to write a violin sonata early on, and it didn't work out, but he hung on to it. He'd written it in 1940, and he brings it to life here. And I think this variation really stands for for young adulthood. He learns what real images are, that however violent their wish to become one, that wild promise cannot be kept. Their case is double, for each now of need ignores the other, as by rival roots of, I'm sorry for the noise. Let's just wait just a second here. One of the joys of Zoom is you're at home, and whatever happens at home, everybody gets to hear. Dawa, can you tell me if you can still hear the music and me, please?
I can, yes, I can hear both.
So it's okay. I can continue, you think?
No, I hear something else. Yeah.
Say that again.
I hear something else. It sounds like some kind of a machine moving.
Okay, it's one of the
machine.
They just turned it off. We are now in young adulthood, clearly. And in this, we have, as I said, no piano, but we have this kind of walking, plodding bass line like adolescents, like young adults tend to do. They're set on a trajectory and they walk through it. that plodding quality of young of young adulthood as we move into and finally having had to grow up. But I think that Bernstein captures it. And we move on to variation 4. And here, my hearing of it is it's kind of the rat race of life and how we begin to abandon some of our youthful ideas. And he says, now unreckoned with, rough, his road descends from the haughty and high, the humorless places his dreams would prefer, and drops him till, as with his forefathers did, he finds out where his world lies. Signs and insignia decide our cause, fanatics of the egg or knights sworn to die for the dolphin, and our deeds wear heretic green or orthodox blue, safe and certain. So the rat race of life. And what we're going to hear is a kind of sprightly, almost a whirring rhythmic figure. And the meter is 5/8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And occasionally the piano is involved in it, but then the piano keeps getting interrupted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The rat race, and using 5 beats to the measure, not 4, not something that we're accustomed to, but all of these, but this different meter sort of being shouted at us. So in this next movement, when you just sort of listen to it without knowing anything of his relationship to the autumn poem, it's kind of, actually, to me, it sounds like Shostakovich. It has a kind of sarcasm. And I think that in a way, the fifth age, or the fifth variation, really sort of corresponds to either getting middle-aged respectability or alternatively being terribly disappointed. So the poem, in peace or war, married or single, he muddles on, offending, fumbling, falling over, and then rather suddenly, there he is standing up, an astonished victor gliding over the good glib waters of the social harbor to set foot on its welcoming shores where at last recognition surrounds his days with her felicitous light. On the other hand, will nightfall bring us some awful order, keep a hardware store in a small town, teach science for life to progressive girls? It is getting late. Shall we ever be asked for? Are we simply not wanted at all? And here is this raucous, Shostakovich-like circus of music. Shall we ever be asked for? It is getting late. Are we simply not wanted at all in this cacophonous world in which we find ourselves? Variation 5. So this next variation is really for the pianist alone. And it's kind of, it has, well, someone called it dissonant, twitchy music. Bernstein indicates in the score that it should be played like a cadenza. In other words, it should have a certain freedom about it. And he also says it needs to be played with a certain amount of sadness. And I think this really is the age where the body begins to decline and people begin to feel nostalgic for sort of a memory of their youth. Our subject has changed. He looks far from well. He is fattened on his public perch, takes pills for vigor and sound sleep, and sees in his mirror the awing genius of a jackass age, a rich bore. He pines for some nameless Eden where he never was, but where the children play, nor care how comely they couldn't be, since they needn't know that they're not happy. So this cadenza-like just the piano in variation 6 as we begin to decline. If I had to pick one variation that's my favorite, that would be it. Not because it necessarily, I guess a little bit it mirrors my own life and where I am, but there is something, the tentativeness, the sadness, and the kind of loneliness and searching quality that this variation, I think, deals with as life begins to wane. And that brings us obviously to the seventh variation and the seventh stage of life. So the seventh one begins with another duet, and it starts out with the oboe and the English horn in duet. It sounds very much like Stravinsky Rite of Spring, which Bernstein would have been getting acquainted with at this time. And then the piano is going to bring back that downward scale into the unconscious that we heard from the very beginning. And Bernstein calls this movement a kind of inner and symbolic journey. It's a kind of dream. And it really is extreme old age and the failing of the mind and body. As Auden says, his last chapter has little to say. He grows backward with gradual loss of muscular tone and mental quickness. He lies down and he yearns only for total extinction. Now the two clarinets, back to where we were in the prologue. And the scale. Now. Many people suggested to Bernstein that this needed to be turned into a ballet. The person who took them up on that was Jerry Robbins, who choreographed an entire ballet to this piece of music. Unfortunately, the choreography has been lost, but others have picked up the challenge. And I just want to share with you at the end of our discussion of this piece, The Age of Anxiety, how this possibly works as a ballet. It was a ballet which was created by Liam Scarlett, the sadly late choreographer with the Royal Ballet in London. And I'm fortunate to have one of my best friends design all of the sets for that. So sort of got, as it was growing and coming along, got some of the scoop as to how it was happening. But I thought it would be nice, before we take our break, for you to just see a couple of minutes of Liam Scarlett working with the dancers. You see the 4 dancers, the 3 men and the women, and the woman, and how he is trying to capture the relationship between the 4 of them.
It's good because we want ordered chaos and revelry generally. If we get it very, very structured, and then we can dissipate out from that, but I need to see it very clean before I see it very drunk. Yes? From running around. Ready? And that's it. Show it! Hold! Classy, Lau, classy. That's it. Good. Give me 5th here, up 5th. That's it. Look at him. That was good. Look at him again. Enjoy it up there, Lau. Good. Build it up. Kick it. Okay, good. Good. I think that's enough. Good. Thank you very much, guys. Very, very good. Very good. Thank you, Rob.
So we've looked at Bernstein every week, I think, as a storyteller. And with The Age of Anxiety, we see it subtle, in a way subtle. You don't have to know that program at all to enjoy or appreciate this Second Symphony of Leonard Bernstein. But knowing the what sort of gave rise to the piece in terms of the poem, I think is extremely helpful. And there's a lot of it we weren't able to discuss today. So we're going to take now a 2.5-minute break, a real quickie, because we got a lot of stuff to do as we finish class today. So take a break. I'll see you back here in 2.5 to 3 minutes. Thank you. Okay, everybody. Are we ready to start in again? I think the noise is abating outside my studio here. So I'm really apologize for how I guess it just comes with the territory. So give me a second, get back onto the screen here. So as we come to this last section of the class, I just want to first of all just take a moment to discuss On the Waterfront. Many of us have seen this movie. It's about an ex-prize fighter who becomes a longshoreman and struggles to sort of stand up to the corrupt union bosses, including his own brother. Here comes the noise again.
Oh, Professor Bailey, your voice does come across very clearly. So
Really? Okay. Well,
yeah.
thank you, Dow. I cannot hear anything myself, so I'm glad it's better for you all. Anyway, I talked to you. I was mentioning this ex-prize fighter and the whole longshoreman. He became a longshoreman, and how he struggled against the corruption of the union bosses. This score was written in the early 1950s. He was writing, lots of theater music and now film music. This is the only film score that he wrote. On the Waterfront won 8 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. And it's interesting. I looked at IMDb, the International Movie Database, and they rate film scores. And this is rated as number 21 of the most famous and important scores. It sits between Ben-Hur of 1959 and The Mission, Morricone's score. So he only wrote one film score, and he didn't understand how film scores worked, so somebody finally gave him a kind of a rough edit of the film. He took it home, ran it on his moviola, and wrote the score. So here's just one clip from the score with obviously Marlon Brando.
Please, Tracy. Oh, Charlie. Wow. Look at that. How much you weigh, Slim? You weighed 168 pounds. You were beautiful. You've been another Billy Kahn. That skunk we got you for the manager. He brought you along too fast. It wasn't him, Charlie. It was you. Remember that night in the garden? You came down my dressing room and said, "Kid, this ain't your night. We're going for the price on Wilson." You remember that? This ain't your night. My night, I could have taken Wilson apart. So what happens? He gets the title shot outdoors in a ballpark, and what do I get? A one-way ticket to Palookaville. You was my brother, Charlie. You should have looked out for me a little bit. You should have taken care of me just a little bit so I wouldn't have to take them dives for the short-end money. Well, I had some bets down for you. You saw some money. You don't understand. I could have had class. I could have been a contender. I could have been somebody. Instead of a bum, which is what I am. Let's face it. It was you, Charlie. Okay. I'll tell him. I couldn't find you. Said nobody won't believe. Here. You take this. You're gonna need it. You pull over.
So his only film score, if you really want to hear the music itself, he created a suite of a symphonic suite of the music from On the Waterfront, and it's a beautiful it's a beautiful setting, and it's a wonderful way to kind of get inside his head in terms of his scoring for a film. So as we come to the sort of conclusion of our looking at Bernstein's music that is not for the stage, I didn't want to be remiss and not include something of his choral work, something that has to do with his Hebrew heritage and his understanding of the language. And I thought Chichester Psalms was a good way to do it. We're only going to hear 2 of the 3 movements today because I'm saving the last movement for our very last class. I think that it is a wonderful way of sort of tying together Bernstein the composer and Bernstein the citizen of the world. So Chichester Psalms came about because Leonard Bernstein received a letter in 1963 from Walter Hussey, who was the dean of Chichester Cathedral in England. And he wrote to Bernstein and said that the organist and choirmaster and I are very anxious to have written some piece of music which the combined choirs could sing at the festival to be held in August of '65. And we wondered if you would be willing to write something for us. I do realize how enormously busy you are, but if you could manage to do this, we should be tremendously honored and grateful. The sort of thing we had in mind was perhaps, say, a setting of the second psalm, or some part of it, either unaccompanied or accompanied by orchestra or organ or both. I only mention this to give you some idea of what was on our minds. Well, Bernstein's artistic process of writing this was an interesting story. He was on sabbatical from the New York Philharmonic, and he was setting about trying to write new music. He said, quote, "I spent almost the entire year writing," are you ready for this? "Writing 12-tone music and even more experimental stuff. I was happy that all these new sounds were coming out, but after about 6 months of work, I threw it all away. It just wasn't my music. It wasn't honest." The end result was Chichester Psalms, which is the most accessible B-flat majorish tonal piece I have ever written. So he was out there experimenting. There was a point where they were going to try to write another musical. I'll tell you about that in just a second. But he got so involved in his process and the fact that he was really saying, I'm not going the direction of 12-tone music, which was so the thing in the middle of the 20th century, but I'm going my own way, that he wrote a poem which he sent to the New York Times. But not to waste, there was a plan for as long as my sabbatical ran, to write a new theater piece. A theater composer needs release, and West Side Story is 8 years old. And so a few of us got hold of the rights to Wilder's play, The Skin of Our Teeth. Well, that didn't work out very well, so he concluded the poem in this way. For hours on end, I brooded and mused on materiae musicae, musical materials used and abused, on aspects of unconventionality, over the death in our time of tonality. Pieces for nattering, clucking sopranos with squadrons of vibraphones, fleets of pianos, played with the forearms, the fists, and the palms. And then I came up with the Chichester Psalms, my youngest child, old-fashioned and sweet, and he stands on his own 2 tonal feet. 1965 in the New York Times. So he had written his Kaddish Symphony, he'd written his Jeremiah Symphony, and he put these pieces together using psalms, but not just exactly Psalm 2, which came from the dean of the cathedral, but he puts together in 3 movements. The first movement, he conjoins a bit of Psalm 8 and a lot of Psalm 100. Then in the second movement, he juxtaposes 2 psalms against one another. And in the third movement, he comes to some to some important conclusion, which you're going to have to wait for 2 weeks to find out what it's about. So let's start with the very first movement of the piece. And I even have brought my score with me today, having conducted this piece on several occasions. I brought my scores so that I can follow along. And I'm going to do something that I normally don't do, and that is to sort of occasionally give a little footnote as the music is playing. So I have written out the Hebrew, because these are sung in Hebrew. There is no English. It's not possible to perform this piece that I know of in English, because the Hebrew language and obviously the message of each of these psalms, it holds a message for the audience, and it's important that, I think, since we're studying them, that we get a chance to look at the text as we're listening to the music. This is a performance of the Washington Choral Arts Society and the Orchestra of St. Luke's, conducted by Gilbert Levine. So we're going to start with the first movement, and it opens with this little bit from Psalm 108, I will rouse the dawn. And you are immediately wakened up to what it is to praise God, to be thankful, to be grateful for the universe that we're in. And the entire movement is a wondrous, not a manic, but a joyful dance. And in the middle of it, in the middle of this dance, we have this delicate, lovely dance for just percussion instruments, and then soloists come in, but it is utterly filled with joy. And the dance begins. Percussion dance. Well, if anything can push us through the day with joy, that movement is just incredible. Lenny could not have lived without fives and sevens. Threes and fours and twos were kind of mundane, but to have this whole movement propelled by that 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3, and I love that gentle moment. He understands that there has to be constant contrast going on in a score, and I do not speak Hebrew. I've studied a little bit. But everybody tells me it's an amazing setting of this Hebrew text, particularly of Psalm 100. And then we move to the second movement of the work. And this, to me, is quintessential Leonard Bernstein, because he juxtaposes two psalms. And let me just read to you the beginning of each one of them. So from Psalm 23, obviously many of us know, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures and leads me beside still waters, etc., etc. And he pairs that, surprisingly enough, with Psalm 2. Why do the nations rage and the people imagine a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed. So what, excuse me, what he's been able to do in his ability to range over such a wide such disparate topics is to take these two psalms and their message and to place them against one another. So we start out with the Lord is my shepherd. And who sings this? A child filled with innocence and a kind of purity, a child who has been really untainted by the world. And the child, like David, the psalmist, is accompanied by the harp and ultimately by the flute and ultimately by more of the orchestra. But the gentle, after that rousing Psalm 100 that we just heard, to then come down to this intimate moment of the child singing, the Adonai, the Lord is my shepherd. But that's not the whole story. The Lord may indeed be my shepherd. We may indeed start in the world as children, but we grow up questioning the Lord and living in a world that is filled with confusion and war. And so up against this beautiful melody of the child comes this war music. And it's fascinating that we have with why do the nations so rage? Lama ragashu goyim. The language itself is percussive in a way that also can signify battle and war. When you're teaching this to a choir, particularly those of us who do not know Hebrew very well, when you're teaching it, they have to find all sorts of ways of remembering and getting a hold of text. So so that opening text, Lama ragashu goyim, became, as people remember it, won't you tie my shoe? Won't you tie my shoe? And there's another one which Yisahak, everybody was going, there's a hawk. But it was a way for people to kind of hang on to the Hebrew and get inside it. So what we're going to hear in this second movement is, first of all, the young boy accompanied by the harp with all of the joy and innocence of a child. And then slamming into that comes the world and the battle scene with percussive voices and instruments and percussive language. But then where do we go? We come to the last third of this, and we're going to have the two psalms superimposed upon one another, so that Psalm 23 hopefully can make its way, can emerge from the battle scene, and can somehow be heard as it's taken over by the entire choir. And as we come to the end, you would think that the battle has ended, as Psalm 23 seems to take over the stage. But listen to the very ending, and I'll point it out. The battle continues to rage no matter where we go. We cannot escape the reality of life. Psalm 23 and Psalm 2. Now, the two psalms superimposed. Here we finish, but listen to the undertone. So Bernstein, the theatrical composer, writes a choral piece for a cathedral in England based on Hebrew Psalms, but like everything he does, there's a message here. And so I want to hang on to it. I want you to think, how would you construct a third movement? What psalm would you choose? No peeking. What psalm would you choose? What would be the message of the story that you are trying to tell? How would you pull it all together? And somehow or other, I think to honor that question, I want to wait until our last week and the very sort of end of our class, because I think it contains an important message as to who he is and how he saw his world. So I hope today in our time together that we've been able to look further into the work of this remarkable man. And as we discover more of his compositions, we see, at least I see, and I hope you see, the amazing, his ability to range over such a wide variety of musics. And it wasn't just superficial. He understood he could play jazz. He understood the Hebrew language. He could bring it into his work. He had that soulful, faith-centered part of his being that keeps being shown. And we saw it in the taking of the Auden poem, and taking that life journey that's only a small portion of a much larger work, and taking the story of the life journey, which he again understood profoundly, and bringing that to our consciousness really through listening and experiencing that piece. So thank you. Next week, we're going to look at Lenny in terms of other composers.